Welcome to That One Show with Bryan Combs. Joining me today is longtime collaborator. I think this is probably the fifth or sixth, maybe even seventh time you've been on, is Lance Turner. And for listeners of the show, they know if Lance is joining me, it means one thing and one thing only. We're talking professional wrestling. Specifically today, we're talking about Hulk Hogan, who unfortunately just passed away a few days ago. And the night he passed away, I texted, or the day after he passed away, I sent Lance a message. I said, Lance, can you come on and just do an episode about Hulk Hogan? And every time Lance is on, we usually do some kind of ranking system, top 10, this or that. But we decided we was just going to have a free-flowing conversation about undoubtedly the biggest icon that pro wrestling has ever and probably will ever see, and that's Hulk Hogan. Lance, thanks for coming on talking about your and I's childhood hero today.
Yeah, very glad to be here. I was glad that you reached out about that. It was funny when you had sent that message. I just told my wife the night before that I was going to reach out to you and see if you wanted to do a show about Hogan, and I was very glad to do it. Like you said, he was a childhood hero, no doubt, a very important part of my growing up, because still today, like you, I'm a pretty huge wrestling fan, so I give him the credit. He was the guy that really got me hooked on it, and really, I really believe that he's the guy that has wrestling laid the foundation to where wrestling is today, pretty much a global juggernaut in most cases.
Absolutely. Him and Vince McMahon together in the 80s basically took pro wrestling from a regional thing. You had these different territories that was on local TV and things of that nature, but they took it at first national and then international. And we can't overstate the significance that Hogan contributed to making wrestling what it is now, which is a global phenomenon. I remember the first time I ever watched wrestling, my dad let me stay up late and watch the Saturday night's main event. And, it was, and I was into comic books at the time and still am, but it was almost like a comic book come to real life for me. You had these bigger than, basically giants and Supermen in the ring. You had Andre the Giant. You had Hulk Hogan out there saying, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, things of that nature. And as I become more and more a wrestling fan, I started gravitating towards the heels because they was just always more fun for me. But you can make a case that Hogan, obviously he's the biggest wrestling star of all time. But you can also, he's definitely the biggest babyface of all time. But you could also make an argument that he's also the biggest heel of all time. He's definitely had the biggest heel turn of all time. I know people act like it's John Cena, but you can't touch. They was almost a full-on ride at Bash at the Beach that year, Lance, when he turned. I mean, they was picking up anything that wouldn't bolt it to the floor and throwing it in the ring on him.
Yeah, they were. That was an incredible scene at Bash at the Beach, and I completely agree with you on that. Not only, there's no question about him being the biggest babyface, and I agree with you that he's no doubtedly, in my opinion, the greatest heel too. That NWO turn and that whole angle, I think, not only did that reinvent him and probably added another 10, 12 years on his career, but it also, I think, catapulted wrestling once again into the mainstream. He did it in the 80s there when him and Vince McMahon joined forces with MTV and him doing the match with Mr. T and all that. But, the NWO seemed to, I don't know, it just seemed like to me it got a lot of people into wrestling that ordinarily weren't wrestling fans. I think they appreciated it, and I think it was the turn to it, kind of turned things away from your more of your characters, the gimmicks, to guys now going by using their names. Kevin Nash, no longer Diesel, the truck driving kind of theme, and Scott Hall, Razor Ramon, kind of your Scarface character type guy, is now using his name Scott Hall, and kind of turning the corner there a little bit and getting to see a little more of the business and things of that nature. So it was just a huge moment. He had all those iconic moments, slamming Andre, all that stuff. and the NWO turn, and like you said, the ring at one point I think was about full of garbage for the fans, and I think they may have edited it out a little bit on Peacock, but one fan got in the ring,
Yeah.
and they had to kind of
Oh, yeah,
take care of business.
Well, now let me ask you something. I mean, obviously, wrestling is scripted. I mean, that kayfabe is totally over. I mean, there's a new show that come on Netflix today that literally shows them behind the scenes discussing who's going to win what matches and stuff. But these guys are bigger and stronger than the average person. Now, how liquored up had to be the fella that he thought he could get in the ring and whoop Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall by himself?
Every time I see that, I kind of feel bad on one hand for the guy because he took a little bit of a beat. But on the other hand, well, what would go through a guy's mind? Not only how, even if he wasn't liquored up, I mean, how much, like you said, it is scripted. And I get into some matches too. I cheer and get into it. Sometimes I'm very disappointed after, the guy I'm really for loses and things. I've always kind of been like that. But I've never been to the point to after a match I thought, well, I don't like that ending. I'm just going to jump this guardrail and I'll take a beating or whatever. I'm going to let people know. I don't want to know what that guy was thinking, but that just goes to show you how much that turn affected, the average wrestling fans and especially your longtime Hulkamaniacs that saw him drop that leg on Savage. Something snapped, I think, and that guy is a very good example of that.
So let's talk about a few of the significant matches that Hogan had throughout his career. Obviously, he won his first world championship against the Iron Sheik in Madison Square Garden, and that actually wasn't a pay-per-view. People sometimes misremember that as being a pay-per-view, but it wasn't. I'm correct in that, right? I think it was just like
just a regular Madison Square Garden show, the way I understood.
But that's really the night that Hulkamania was truly born. Yeah. But the biggest match in wrestling history at the time, and many say still today, was him and Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3. I think they claim 100-some thousand, but if you go and look at the stadium that was held in, its capacity was really 80, some maybe 90,000 people. Wrestling throughout the years, wrestling tends to exaggerate things, be it weight. I mean, Yokozuna, he gained 50 pounds every time they announced him coming to the ring. By the end of his career, they acted like he was 800 and some pounds. But there's no doubt that there was only one superstar at that time that could have filled 90-some thousand seats, or ever how many it was, and that was Hulk Hogan with the help of Andre the Giant. And the build-up to this match captivated me like nothing I'd ever, seen at the time. I'd really started getting into wrestling, and Andre turned on Hogan on a Piper's Pit.
Yes.
And Hogan started crying and whatnot, and when he turned on Hogan, he ripped his cross off of his cross necklace, and he accidentally actually drew blood.
Right.
And that just made it all that much the better. And we talked about how kayfabe is dead. There's so many books and documentaries about this, but pretty much Andre was big and strong enough to where if he didn't like whatever they said was going to be the finish and he wanted to call it on his own in the ring, they wasn't a daggone thing anybody could do about it. And Hogan said he didn't know until in the match if Andre would take the pinfall. And towards the end of the match, Andre whispered at him and said, "Slam me." And he said, "Okay." And it was the body slam heard around the world. First time anybody had picked up Andre the Giant. Now, they said he was 780 pounds. I doubt he was that heavy, but he was definitely well over 500. And for a man to be able to pick him up and lift him and pose for a few seconds before you slammed him, to me, was the greatest athletic feat I'd ever seen in my life at that point.
Yeah, I agree. That slam was amazing. I'm like you. I think Andre was definitely over 500 pounds. And it is very interesting, like you pointed out, that, going into such an important, iconic match, you didn't really know if Andre was going to follow the script until right during the match. But incredibly, I think he sensed what was happening and let it go through, thankfully. But yeah, the like you said, the lead up to it, the Piper's Pit episode, him ripping off the cross was amazing build up. And as a young kid watching that, I was so angry. I wanted Hook to win so bad, and then you get to the match, and like you said, the slam up until that point, I'm like you, it's the greatest thing I'd seen in the ring, and still is a huge thing. It would, it'd probably still be top 5 moments, if you go through everything that I think in wrestling, because it was just unheard of. And, it wasn't one of those slams like you see sometimes today where the guy struggles and then might have to reattempt it a time or two.
Clean.
He scooped him up and got him up. There were no hesitation about it, and then slammed him. It's a beautiful slam, and then of course the atomic leg drop to finish things off. And like you said, there was only one guy that could feel that stadium like that, and I think he had the right opponent in Andre at the time.
Absolutely.
I think it was great too to see Andre one more time in a big thing like that, because I'm not 100% sure, but I think at that time his health was starting on the downward trend, and so it was great to see one more big moment for Andre as well.
It wasn't his last big moment. You can argue that Andre's last big moment to come in the rematch on Saturday Night Main Event about a year or two later, in one of the most famous wrestling matches of all time, in which watching it live, when it happened, that's about the maddest I'd ever been in my life over wrestling. Andre got Hogan down for the pin, and he clearly got his shoulder up a good, maybe after about the one, definitely the 2 count, and the ref just kept on counting and give Andre the title. And then he surrendered it to the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. And I'll be damned if they hadn't have hit poor old Earl Hebner over the head and tied him up in a broom closet back there and got his brother to come out and act like him and paid him off too. As the $1 Million Man said, everybody's got a price.
Yes. Yeah,
sadly, I think that's the only time Andre held the World Heavyweight title in his career.
I believe so. I don't know for a fact, but I'm like you. That's the only time I can remember him having the title, just for that, maybe that one night. And like you said, they did I guess that was the first screw job before the Bret Hart one, and then the Hebner twins, DiBiase proved that everybody had a price, and he wanted to be champion that bad. And then of course I think following that they vacated it, and then I think had the tournament. I believe that's Macho Man after they got the capture. But anyway, yeah, that was. I like you. That moment will always stick in my mind as well. Just being angry and things like that. And going back just a moment here, I do remember, like you said, your first memory of getting to see Hogan, and I share that same memory as on getting to watch that Saturday Night Main Event when they didn't air Saturday Night Live. I stayed with my grandma a lot back then, and after she'd go to bed, I got the TV. And after I got to see Main Event one time, every Saturday I'd turn over just to see if it was on. And that was really at that time, that was really the only time I ever got to see anything WWF related. Unfortunately, where I lived at the time, the only wrestling I got to watch any on a regular basis was the old NWA, WCW stuff on TBS.
Have you got... You got some matches there that you want to talk about. Go ahead and pick one. We'll talk about it of Hogan's career.
All right. Well, I know this is just me personally. Some of my all-time favorite matches. We've touched on the Rock one, but probably right behind the Rock match, which is my favorite one of all time that involves Hogan. Is
I agree.
His at WrestleMania 6 in 1990 going up against Ultimate Warrior. Now, I know a lot of people, and especially wrestling fans, have mixed opinions and feelings about the Warrior, but at that time, I have to admit, other than Hogan, I absolutely loved the character. He was crazy, never made any sense on anything he said, but I was still captivated by it.
And a lot of drugs involved, legal and illegal.
Exactly, and just the way, that music would hit, and his entrance to the ring also at that time, I was only 12 years old, so I was really enthralled by all of that. And, it's my first time ever seeing two guys. Neither one was really a heel
No.
or did anything related to heel work leading into the match. The Warrior was the Intercontinental Champion. Hogan was the world, title versus title. I'd never seen that either before this match. And just at the time, and still for me personally, it holds up because I just thought it was a great match, and two of my favorites going at it.
Yeah, it's funny because I looked up all the accolades that Hogan earned over his career in addition to championships, and Pro Wrestling Insider always does a year-end thing to where they write up and pick the best match of the year, and Hogan in his whole career only had 2 matches of the year. One of them was the one you just talked about, him and the Warrior at WrestleMania 6 in Toronto, and the other one was him and The Rock, again at a WrestleMania in Toronto 12 years later. And I would have to agree as far as in-ring performances, because the knock on Hogan was he was, quote-unquote, never a great in-ring performer, but I think that he was. I think he didn't. Go back and watch some of the matches he did over in New Japan.
Yes.
He just was never allowed to do that here because that wasn't his persona. His persona was he can pretty much kick out of any move, hulk up, and when he does, he points his finger at you, and it's over for you. And when he points that finger and waves it in your face, it don't matter what you do. Hulkamania is running wild on you.
Yes.
But that was the first time I'd ever seen Hulk Hogan lose a match up until that point. And at that point, I'd been watching wrestling probably for about 4 or 5 years, and that was the first time I ever seen him lose a singles match, and he lost cleanly, too, one of his few clean losses over his 30-year career. And poor Ultimate Warrior, speaking of the significance of Hulkamania, Warrior got super popular, and it was supposed to be, quote-unquote, a passing of the torch, and he was going to be the main guy. He just didn't have it like Hogan had it. One of the things Hogan never got enough credit for to me was his mic skills. Hell, I mean, he ended up doing movies and whatnot. That shows you how good of an actor he can be. But he just had, quote unquote, it. And by that I mean he had what very few people have in what any industry, be it a movie star, athlete, or whatever. Just charisma that you can't force on people and you can't create. It was a God-given talent. And the poor Ultimate Warrior, I mean, I don't think I've ever understood a single vignette or interview he ever did, Lance. I mean, it was just rubbish. Just I don't know if they had a script and he couldn't read it and just made it up on his own or what. But I mean, did he ever make any sense to you ever?
No, that's one of the things that I can't understand looking back on it, why at certain points in times I considered myself a Warrior fan. Because, I never understood a single promo that he did. But like I said, it was just so crazy that I wouldn't turn away from it. I'd keep watching it.
One time at Survivor Series, he started just wrapping up him and his 3 tag team partners up in some kind of medical tape or something.
Yes, very well. I remember that. And the one that I remember most, that I always remember, and I don't know it verbatim, but I just know that one of the, during the interview, he was saying something about he would jump in the cockpit of the plane and things of that. And you just have to find it because I don't remember these days. But that one always sticks out in my mind. I'm not for sure what pay-per-view it was at. But, I mean, he just rambled complete nonsense. But the way he delivered it and things, he had it. But unfortunately, I don't know, like you said, I think he had a lot of outside of the ring problems that you mentioned, the drugs and things, and I don't think he really cared either. After watching a lot of documentaries, sadly, it seemed like he really didn't care as much as Hogan and did. And I think that right there played a big part, too, in his failure to take up the torch and run with it. Because I don't think he really cared. As famously he held up Vince for more money to show up at a big-time pay-per-view event. I mean, if you really are loyal and care about what you do, you don't pull stuff like
Vince
that.
Fired him that night, didn't he?
Yeah, right after the event, Vince paid him this money,
told
him to take a hike right after the show.
I want to talk about the Mega Powers angle. because I mentioned earlier that as more and more I watched wrestling, I started cheering for the heels, and this was the first time I ever turned on Hogan. I was for the Macho Man during this time because I was just thought his angle was more interesting. And the Macho Man and Hulk Hogan at the time were the two biggest superstars in WWE, and both happened to be faces or good guys. And Elizabeth was the Macho Man's real life, but he's also his manager or his valet. And the Mega Powers united, and it was a phenomenon. I mean, it was an unstoppable force, and really the only thing that could stop them was when the Mega Powers exploded. Yes. Now, I urge anybody to go back and watch this. It was a Saturday night's main event, and Elizabeth took a bump and was hurt, so Hogan went out to check on her and packed her back to the locker room for some medical assistance. And she was the Macho Man didn't take too kindly to that. And he said that Hogan had that look in his eyes, you know, he was lusting after her. He even said something to the nature that he thought he touched her butt as he was taking her to the locker room or something. So he went back there and poor Elizabeth was on a gurney. I think she had all this different medical equipment hooked to her, and Macho Man just started beating the living crap out of Hogan. I mean, just picking up anything that wasn't tied down and whooping him up on the head with it. And I think he even pushed Elizabeth at one point. He snapped.
He did.
Long before he snapped into a Slim Jim, the Macho Man snapped that night. Yes. And it culminated, I think, with their they had a match at WrestleMania, didn't they, Lance?
Yes, yeah.
Was that Sev?
I think they had.
I think it was the year after he fought Warrior at WrestleMania.
I think it might have been
7, yeah. And it speaks to the talents of the Macho Man in the ring, because that there was one of the best Hogan matches I remember too, was him and the Macho Man.
Yes.
They're almost year long. Well, that storyline went on for about 2 years because they were, you know, on the same page for the longest time, and then they feuded, and it culminated into a WrestleMania match. Yeah. And to show you how silly wrestling is, I mean, from what I understand, the Macho Man's angle wasn't too far off from how he was in real life. He was always paranoid and whatnot. Yeah. And by all accounts, he was always a little bit suspicious of Hogan and Elizabeth in real life.
Yes. It is, like you say, when you go back and, you know, these days we, fortunately, I guess, or unfortunately, how you want to look at it as a wrestling fan, you have access to a lot of documentaries, and now you have a lot of books out there that can opens up a lot of behind the scenes stuff goes on. And yeah, you're right. I think the Macho Man, the way he was in the ring, really emulated a lot of how he was outside the ring. Like you said, he was very paranoid about that relationship with Hogan and Elizabeth, all of it wrapped into one. And you know, just to give an example of just how I don't want to say maybe paranoid, but how, I guess, a little bit how eccentric he was. There's several instances where wrestlers talk about how he wanted, before a match, to go over it and over it and over it, even before they actually had the match. And you know, to his credit, maybe that was a positive, because he had some of the most incredible in-ring matches you'll see. Just watch him and Steamboat. You know, that's about a picture-perfect match as you'll find. But like you said, even with Hogan, you know, and I don't want to discredit Hogan, because like you said, I think he was a lot better in the ring than people give him credit for. But like you said, over here in the States, he was expected just to be a powerhouse. He wasn't expected to go in there and give you a 5-star wrestling match. But working with Savage, I thought they did a great job, and I loved the build-up in the Mega Powers, because I was just waiting. I knew it wasn't going to hold up. I just kept waiting. When's it going to blow up? I know Macho Man is, strung tied. He's not going to hang on for this partnership forever. I was just waiting for it to explode, as you said. And I loved every moment of it. That's one of my favorite things they done, too. And I also kind of enjoyed, I think they were called the Mega Maniacs, him and the Barber.
Yes.
Had a little partnership. It wasn't near as good as the Mega Powers, but it's still a fun thing that I recall watching a lot of, too, back then.
Well, that's a perfect segue into what I want to talk about next, because Hulk Hogan had a match and Brutus the Bar Beefcake was his tag team partner, and it was against Zeus and Ted DiBiase. They actually had 2 matches, but the backstory in this, and this is how silly wrestling is. So Hulk Hogan was the first wrestler really to star in a movie. Jesse Ventura had some supporting roles and stuff, but Hogan starred in a movie back in 1989 called No Holds Barred.
Yes.
And he really showed his range as an actor, because in this he played a world heavyweight champion.
Yeah.
But his character's name in this was Rip.
Yeah.
It wasn't Hulk Hogan. And the main villain of this movie was a character by the name of Zeus. Spoiler alert, they wrestle and Hogan whoops him as Rip. And a few weeks later, I'll be damned if Zeus don't show up in the WWE, but now he shows up as Zeus, even though Hogan is Hogan and not Rip. It don't make any sense whatsoever. And I think he showed up at a Saturday night's main event. Best I can remember, Hogan was fighting the big boss man in a steel cage, and the boss man's manager at the time was the Reverend Slick. And he brings Zeus out to try to interfere in the match, and that ends up with Hogan and DiBiase fighting Beefcake and Zeus in a tag team match at SummerSlam. And then they had a rematch when they had a special pay-per-view called No Holds Barred, the movie and the match, in which I think for $40 you got to watch the movie, and then they had that rematch right after it there. And that's one of the I mean, number one, I don't understand why Hogan wasn't just Hogan in the movie, because it was produced by the WWE, so they had the licenses and the rights, because Hogan and Vince McMahon were the executive producers of it. But this character's supposed to be just from the movie, and all of a sudden in real life he's still the character from the movie, not the actor. I think his real name was Tiny Lister. Yeah. And God help him, for all the people that said Hogan can't wrestle in the ring, you go back and watch either of those 2 matches that Zeus was in. It's about the worst I've ever seen, Lance. You remember those?
I do. I remember them well. Exactly like you said, I remember watching No Holds Barred back then. As stupid as, well, I don't want to call the movie stupid. I guess it's being a little bit harsh about it, but it is kind of a goofy a movie in all senses, but it's still, in my opinion, a movie worth watching. I liked it. I enjoyed it, especially back in the day. To me, it's by far his best movie, if that says anything about his career in movies.
That might be saying more than about the other movies than it does this one, as far as quality is concerned.
I guess it probably does. And, to my credit, I have seen a lot of his movies, the Suburban Commando.
Mr. Nanny.
Mr. Nanny. I mean, I'm not saying they're horrible, but this one, to me, is my favorite. But like you said, I don't understand that either. Going into the film, I thought he was going to be himself, really, because it was really, the whole plot was about wrestling, really, But I had no clue. I thought it was just a movie and that, and then to have Zeus show up, in WWF at the time was really a surprise to me. And you're right, poor old Zeus, and maybe it's not his fault. I don't know how much time he had to really train or anything like that, but he. There's been some pretty bad wrestlers out there. There's no doubt about that. But I've no doubt if you probably did a top 5, Zeus would definitely fall in that category. The guy absolutely couldn't do anything in the ring, to be honest about it. He was just supposed to be a big old brute that, I took to be a little bit immune to pain almost, that came in there. But, like you said, that's just a prime example of how far wrestling can go and how much they lean on, being complete fiction and just wanting fans to accept stuff. And we do it as fans, but looking back on it, that one was a little bit questionable.
Speaking of questionable, now Hulk Hogan was famous for exaggerating some stuff about his career. And to me, the most unintentionally funny thing that this man ever said was that he wrestled 400 days in 1 year. And when he said that, I think it was on Joe Rogan maybe, and they asked him how that was possible, and he said he'd fly to Japan and then fly back to L.A. and fight, and where the time zone changes, he was able Just flip-flop days, and he wrestled 400 days in 1 year. I don't hardly believe that, Lance.
You know what? I don't know. I don't either, really. I don't think that's possible at all. But I love his explanation, though. Depending on how old I would have been, I'd have been like, you know what, Hulk, I believe you now. But yeah, you're right. It's strange how they embellish a lot, and and I don't really understand that, especially when it comes to the greats like Hogan and Flair and Austin and The Rock. I don't really think those guys have really embellished a lot, but I don't even see why they would embellish anything. They don't have to. Their career and things of that nature and matches and things speak for itself. But I hadn't heard that. Yeah, I'm going to have to go back and watch that. But that would have been a good one to hear, the 400 days in a year.
Let's talk about his. He was the biggest star in wrestling, and he left and went to WCW in the mid '90s there. And we briefly talked about his NWO run at the beginning of the episode, but I want to go a little bit more in depth to this before we sign off on this episode. Hogan was the one wrestler you never thought would turn heel, and when they always said the outsiders, Nash and Hall, was supposedly invading WCW, and at Bash at the Beach they said they would have a third man, but when the match started they didn't have one, so they was basically fighting a handicap match between, I believe it was Macho Man Sting and Lex Luger. And they got Hall and Nash got the best of them, and here come Hogan down the aisle for the save. He gets in the ring, he rips his shirt off like he always does. Macho Man's already laid out there, and all of a sudden he just nonchalant just drops a leg on him. And then he picks the referee up. I think it was it Neil? I can't remember the referee's name, but he throwed him out of the ring, dropped the leg on him again, and then Scott Hall done the 3 count, and they stood in the ring. And then the trash started flowing, and then Mean Gene Okerlund come out to try to get to the bottom of what the hell had happened. And Hogan cut, in my opinion, the best promo of his career. First, it was his first heel promo.
Yes.
But if you go back and watch this, it's about a 2-minute speech, and it gets the fans who had been behind him for 2 decades so mad. Like we said, one jumped into the ring and tried to fight him.
Yes.
But they was probably anything that wouldn't tie it down in the stands, any
Yes.
hot dog wrapper, any beer can, any bottle that they could get a hold of was in that ring. I mean, it was ankle deep in there.
Yes.
And it was just bouncing off of his head, and he still kept right on cutting that promo. It didn't stop him. So it was a brilliant heel turn and a brilliant explanation as why. And if you didn't believe that he was a heel, the next night on Nitro he showed up, and I'll be damned if he hadn't a black beard all of a sudden.
Yes.
He must have went to Walmart and got him from Just for Men, because he had a coal black beard, but he still had a yellow mustache. That don't make any sense. But that run really, like you said, me and you was probably at one time the only 2 wrestling fans at Breathitt County High School. We went, and we went from being the only 2 people wearing a wrestling shirt, and you seen these NWO shirts everywhere all of a sudden. People were buying them up. That coupled with Stone Cold led to the huge explosion of wrestling's popularity, and took it mainstream in the late 90s, maybe like it never been before.
Yeah, I completely agree. For all the things WCW got wrong, one thing they did do really well, masterfully really, was the build-up that led to Hogan doing that heel turn and being the third man of the NWO. I really loved, because at that time, like I said, wrestling was still kind of gimmicky in a lot of the senses, and so to finally see guys come in using names, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, and of course, if you were a fan, you knew that was Diesel and Razor Ramon showing up on Nitro, and you didn't really have, access like you do today of a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff, so. And especially for me, I didn't really have access to anything to know what was really going on. So of course, I didn't believe for a moment that they were still under, WWF, contracts or anything like that nature. But I did, was really intrigued by the fact that here they were showing up, and the whole outsider angle, that they were kind of invading. And going into that match, I had no idea who the third man were going to be, and I thought maybe it was just them being the outsiders, just a hoax really to try to pull one over on us fans when it was the 3-on-2 during the match, and then Hogan comes out. I thought, oh man, because I thought, Hall and Nash sold that really well. They got out of the ring in a hurry when Hogan
they run scared.
Yeah, came down the aisle there, and then like you said, he ripped the shirt off, and then just, it was an everyday thing for him. He laid the leg on Macho Man, and then as the rest is history, as they say. And then, like you said, the next night, and he used the moniker Hollywood Hogan, and he really played it up, and I thought it was great. And like you said, it was a wonderful promo he did in the ring. I can't remember exactly, but I can remember him saying, "These fans can stick it."
Yeah,
and I'll never forget that part, because who would have ever dreamed Hogan saying that to the fans? But yeah, it really did make it mainstream. Like you said, me and you had been fans since we were children, and I'm sure there might have been some others. I had a couple of other guys that were fans, but a lot of them didn't understand what I seen the appeal of with wrestling. And then all of a sudden, they're watching Nitro every night, and I'm like, now you get it. It might be a little too late, but I'm not going to call you a wrestling fan. But yeah, you're right. The Monday Night Wars really escalated wrestling, and I think it catapulted it into the mainstream, and probably brought in a whole new generation of fans into watching pro wrestling. But that was one of the largest moments in wrestling history, if not the biggest.
Yeah, it's one of the most shocking and definitely biggest heel turn ever. That run he had with the NWO was a really solid 2 or 3 years before things started going south. And we mentioned earlier he did, WWF bought out WCW in the early 2000s there, and it took a little while, but the NWO did show up in the WWF or WWE, I guess, at the time, and it's him and Hall Nash still, and they had another good run, and it culminated. Pretty much the end of the NWO was that night at WrestleMania 18, and the crowd dictated that. If you'll go back and listen to any interview that The Rock and Hogan said, that they had to totally improvise and change what they had planned to do in the ring because of the crowd's reaction when they both come down the aisle. They booed the babyface and cheered the heel. And we mentioned how great that match was. That's definitely my favorite Hogan match of all time. And I'll be honest with you, it's probably my second favorite match of all time behind Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, their first WrestleMania match, which to me is the greatest in-ring match of ever. But the crowd was insane for that match, and it carried over to the next night on Monday Night Raw. Hogan still come out as Hollywood Hogan. He wasn't back in the red and yellow yet. He opened the show, and when he got in the ring, he went to speak, and the crowd give him a 10-minute standing ovation. Every time he'd go to try to hold the mic up to speak into it, they just got louder and louder. And you can go back and watch this on Peacock, or you can actually just on YouTube. It's on there too on the WWE's channel. You can see him getting misty-eyed. It generally touched him because, for good or bad, people would turn on Hogan sometimes for stuff in his personal life, which we're not really going to go in. Today, the only thing I'll say about that is if you live long enough, all of us is going to make mistakes.
Absolutely.
And we never should be judged by our worst day. But it was great to see him finally get the recognition from the fans again after all those years of being a heel. The fans turned him into a babyface again. It wasn't in the plans. The fans demanded it, and they got it. And he went on a run to where he ended up winning the world title again.
Yeah, it was a very special time, like you said. The icon of the '80s, and then reinventing himself with the NWO and the '90s there, and had another great run in WCW, and then they make their way back to WWE after being away for a while. Yeah, you're right. I think the fans finally. I don't know if I want to say finally, but either way, ever how you want to phrase it, they, like you said, they finally gave him the recognition I think that he deserved for being the in-ring performer and just the overall performer that he'd be. And As much as I loved Hogan up until that point, when he returned in '02 there going forward, I enjoyed that run of his career maybe as much as I did any other time. We said several times during this show, that match at WrestleMania 18 with The Rock is my all-time favorite Hogan match. It may be my favorite match ever. I'm not going to say that right away because I'm sure I might have forgot some, but it's right up there, one or two at least anyway. And then, he had so much fun during that run. That Raw afterwards, the ovation was incredible, and then him beating Triple H at Backlash for one more little title run. Although it didn't last very long, it was still very special because the fans made that happen, like you said. And I loved the a little bit there later on, he did the Mr. America thing with Vince.
It's the worst disguise in the history of mankind.
Absolutely.
His damn mustache was sticking straight out the mask.
Yeah, and what little hair he had was coming out the back of the mask, and everything else looked exactly like Hogan, but hey, it wasn't Hogan, it was Mr. America.
Sounded like him too,
Yeah, didn't change his voice at all. It's still the Hulkster there. I enjoyed that, and then the only time he was a tag team champion, I loved it with him and Edge on SmackDown that night, beat Billy and Chuck. That was really fun. And then, of course, he had the WrestleMania match with Mr. McMahon, which is one of my favorite Hogan matches.
I'm glad you brought that up because it was so much better than it had any right to be because neither one of them were in the prime of their life at the time. And I think it was a street fight, wasn't it?
It was.
And it was brutal. Both of them bladed or got busted open for real. There was blood all over the place. And
yes.
It was a good 25-minute match with two guys in their 50s or older. And McMahon was never really, a wrestler. He had several matches, but that wasn't what he trained to do. But it was a match that they built as a lifetime in the making.
Yeah, to see them in the ring together was special. That was a lot of fun, and I liked, one match that sticks out to me too during this run. I liked it, although I think it was another one of those rare times he lost cleanly was when he faced Brock Lesnar. He was up and coming, the next big thing. That was fun and entertaining. And then you talked about Shawn Michaels there. I loved the Hogan-Michaels thing, their SummerSlam match. A lot of people think maybe Michaels was being a little disrespectful, but I loved the part that he played where he really sold everything the Hulkster done. Went a little bit over the top a lot with it, but
there's that one where he clotheslines him and he goes over the top rope and literally rolls about 30 times down, almost all the way back to the locker room. But that was a good feud because they were a tag team partners and they had won a match. They're in the ring celebrating. And Hogan's theme song's playing, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he hits Hogan with the Sweet Chin music for no reason whatsoever.
Exactly. And too, I thought it's also fun run because you got to see him with, at that time, the next big stars in the making have fun with. I remember him and Cena and Batista had a match, and after the match, they all did, the hand over the ear, the posing, and, them, really paying homage to Hogan. To me, as special as the 80s and the NWO was, that 02 on run with him back in WWE as it was then was, to me, just about as good as anything that Hogan's done because, as you said, the NWO, their run in WWE at that time was very short-lived. They had a little bit of a run there, getting in with Hogan or The Rock and Stone Cold. They had their matches or whatnot, but it didn't last a whole long, I don't think, because I think they came in like January or February that year, and then, of course, by then at WrestleMania, Hogan had to go back to the red and yellow.
Well, I'm glad that he did because, several things had to happen in order for that. Number one, he was still under pretty much a lifetime contract with WCW, so had McMahon not bought WCW, he might never have returned to the WWE. And number two, he returned still as a heel Hollywood Hogan. And like we said, the crowd forced him in to putting the baby face again. And the lasting image of Hogan in the ring should not have been Hollywood as big as it was. It should have been in him in the red and yellow, flexing his muscles while Real American plays, which for my money is one of the great entrance songs of all time. Very first wrestling episode we ever did was talking about entrance songs 3 or 4 years ago, so we talked in depth then about that. But before we go, did you ever have a chance to see Hogan wrestle live in person?
I never got to see him wrestle live in person, no, but I did get to see him at a wrestling event. My wife and I, a few years ago, flew out to L.A. We did a little trip, but we made the trip around the premiere of Fox, SmackDown on Fox, and Hogan was in attendance at that, and I got to see him. That's the only time I ever got to see him in person, but he was not a in-the-ring performer.
When I was 8, the only time I ever got to see him was the first wrestling match I ever attended in person. It was at Rupp Arena, and it was to show you how big Hogan was. This was at what they called a house show, which means it was not a television taping or a pay-per-view or anything like that. It literally was just matches at a local arena. And just for that, they sold 18,000 tickets at Rupp Arena. It was filled to the rafters. The main event that night was Hulk Hogan and Bam Bam Bigelow versus Andre the Giant and the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. And I'm telling you that was one of the greatest nights of my life at that point. I remember I was a little fella, and for the main event, Dad held me up so I could see real good. And I couldn't speak for about 4 days afterwards. I screamed so much for Hogan as he come down the aisle that night, because that was back before I started cheering for the heels. But that's a memory that I'll cherish forever. Not just because I got to see Hogan, but because of the memory that I made with my dad.
Right.
And one more thing that I want to say. When he first got to be Hogan again with the red and yellow there, I guess what year was it, Lance? About 02, 03?
Yeah, I know that WrestleMania 18 was 02, so
Yeah.
it would have been in that
I
area.
jumped online in my dorm room at Morehead State, went online and bought a Hulkamania shirt. And I used my dad's credit card, and I'll be damned, back then the internet was pretty much the Wild West. Somebody stole that credit card and called a porn line down in Florida and all that, and I never could hardly convince my dad that wasn't me. And honest to God, I bought the shirt, but I didn't call no porn line.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I'm the same way. I've got, I think, about 3 or 4 Hogan shirts. I got way too many wrestling shirts, to be honest about it. I'll never wear them enough to wear them out, so to speak. But, I love that kind of stuff. I got Marvel and DC shirts and what have you. But, yeah, and I've even got another Hogan shirt pre-ordered. It says Hulkamania 4 Live on it. But, yeah, he was just a childhood icon. Probably, there's been through our lifetime, a lot of celebrities that passed away that we probably had a connection to one way or to another. I know, especially, I know there's probably been a ton of music ones that, especially with you being such a huge music fan. But I have to say this is probably, I don't want to say the first one, but maybe one of the major ones to really hit me pretty hard. Because I guess too, in a way, like you said earlier in the show, it was kind of sudden. I'd read a few things that he wasn't feeling the best leading up to it, but then he just had I'm assuming a cardiac arrest, a heart attack, all of a sudden, and he was gone. I was really hoping. I had plans to visit, hopefully to catch him at his shop there in Orlando here within the next year or so, and I guess that proves you shouldn't really try to wait too long. You never know, but this one really hit me pretty hard. Like I said, we both grew up watching him, and even as a teen and young adult, he was still captivating my attention and one of my favorites. And I just absolutely loved the character, and very integral part of not just childhood, but I guess my entire life.
Yeah, I think the part of his death that was so shocking was he was always the immortal Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
He always got up. And you just, when you're little, when you're watching wrestling, he's out there doing that, you think he's pretty much Superman. He's just indestructible. But that goes to show you that wrestling is hard on the body. I mean, if you any of these wrestlers that do it for any significant amount of time don't A lot of them die young, man.
Yeah, they do.
It takes a toll on them, physically and mentally. You're on the road all year. You're beating yourself up night in and night out. You're popping pain pills just to keep going to the next match. And I think Hogan was 71. But do you want to give any final thoughts on Hogan? I'll give mine, and then I'll turn it over to you before we close out. Okay. I'll repeat that Hulk Hogan was the reason I started really watching wrestling. And if anybody grew up in the 80s or 90s, I would venture to say he's the reason why they started watching wrestling. And there's never been a bigger crossover star than Hogan. When he was heavyweight champion, he was making movies. He was hosting Saturday Night Live. He was on MTV. He really crossed wrestling over to the mainstream and took it to a level it had never seen, and maybe has never seen since. He's by far the most iconic wrestler and the most important wrestler of all time. And the last episode you and I did together, we did the Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling a few months ago, and he was the first one on there. I think the conversation starts with him. You can argue about who the other three should be, but the first one on there has to be Hulk Hogan, the most important and iconic professional wrestler in the history of the business. Lance, I'll turn it over to you before we sign off, bub.
Yeah, I'll second everything you said there. There's no question about it. When you talk about the Mount Rushmore of professional wrestling, Hulk Hogan is number one, and then you can, like you said, have a debate and discussion about the other three that should be on that list. I agree. He was the reason that I got into professional wrestling, and was no doubt about it the biggest star and icon, and laid the foundation for what wrestling is today. And the guy just had an incredible career. And as you said, sadly, that business takes a toll on it. And I guess, to be honest about it, for him to make it to 71, I'm sad and wished he was here with us and was for a long time going forward. But I guess in a lot of ways he was kind of lucky in some senses too, because he started out back in those days where there were territories, and basically you didn't get paid much as it was, but if you didn't work, you definitely didn't get paid. And as you alluded to, they had to take pills and do whatever they had to do to get in the ring. And then, it amazes me when you read the list of what some of these guys, the back surgeries, neck surgery. I think he just had a neck surgery not long.
Had both hips replaced, both knees replaced, fusion on his spine.
Yeah, double-digit back surgeries, I think I read. So it's just incredible what he's went through to still be able to stand up and, I just think he was, the best, really, no other way to say it. And really sad that he's gone, but we'll always have the memories and these wonderful matches. And he played, as you said, professional wrestling begins and ends with Hulk Hogan, and I'll forever be a Hulkamaniac.
Well, I think it's true. It was, a slogan back in the 80s and 90s, Hulkamania will live forever, but that's actually true, especially now with all the archives on Peacock and Netflix. People that's not even born yet will go back years from now and discover Hulk Hogan and all the great things he did in the ring. Yes. Lance, I appreciate you coming on short notice. But I think we had to do it.
Yes, most definitely.
And hopefully, people listening found something to entertain them here. And as we remember, the one and only, the immortal Hulk Hogan.